I'll intro the companies soon, but for now, I'm going to hand it to Vaishali, who is head of programs and evaluation. She keeps us all organized and on our toes. So I'll introduce Vaishali and bring the panel.
Thank you, Christina. So first of all, a shout out to the Venture Fellows team, Christina, Hannah, and Zoeli, who organized this panel and coordinated with our lovely speakers. I'm just showing up here to ask some difficult questions, I suppose. So as Christina mentioned, my name is Vaishali Paliwal. I'm the head of programs and evaluation here at LARTA Institute. We should probably invite our panelists to join the stage, please. Chris Johnson, who is the product and innovation lead from Wells Fargo, Smita Satiani, climate advisor, Schmidt Futures, and Galen, Treuer, climate tech and economic innovation, Miami-Dade County, Office of Economic Development. Thank you. So most of our cities today are not designed to cope with the kind of environmental and climate issues that we are facing, whether it is flooding or water shortage or pollution, heat stress, and food deserts. 60% of the world population is expected to live in the cities by 2030. 11 of the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals require direct action in our cities. So the case is pretty clear. How we make our cities more resilient while we secure resources for our future generations, while we build quality lifestyles for our people and maintain a healthy planet is the need for the day. LARTA is very fortunate and very grateful that we have some incredible partners and speakers on the ground, on the front line, who are working to understand these very complex problems and the possible solutions around it. We are being joined by such experts today. Thank you again for joining. I will please request all of you to introduce yourselves. I've always found that's the better way to do this. And while you're making your introductions, if you can please also share with the audience that what is urban climate resilience to you, and how is it that your work is contributing to this work and to this cause?
Hello, yeah, all right. Hey, my name is Galen Treuer. I work in Miami-Dade County, which is in Florida. And we are a smaller version of LA, I guess. We've got 34 municipalities and 2.8 million people. I lead our climate and economic development work, kind of as an extension of the office of the mayor. And the real issue with climate change in Miami is existential, right? Can we stay there? Can the people who live there now afford to continue to live there? It's a nice place to be. It's getting more expensive, and climate is not helping with that. And I think that it's affordability and it's safety. I think that's the main thing.
You turn on this one. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Chris Johnson with the Wells Fargo Foundation. I work on a team focused on small business growth philanthropy. I lead a portfolio that's mostly focused on product innovation. I like to describe it as trying to find the intersection of our impact philanthropic work and then longer-term business product and service development opportunities. For me, when I think about resiliency, it's also about just kind of preserving what we have, but it's also about adaptability. I think everything's going to change. We know things are changing currently, and they will in the future, so it's just how can we create an environment that continues to be livable and supportive for the people in those communities. And for us in particular, it's really through the lens of small business support. So we want to create an environment where small businesses can ideally thrive and grow.
Hi, everyone. I'm Smita. I have spent the last 15 years thinking about emerging technology, and both in the government and outside the government. Spent 6.5 years over at Google X, formerly, or the experimental labs of Google. Now we just go by X, but was on the policy team there. And then several months ago, left X and started advising climate technology companies. And nonprofits on how policy and tech can work together to deploy climate solutions more responsibly, a little bit more thoughtfully. I'm really interested in some of the barriers to deploying climate technology and thinking about how we can just be more thoughtful. When I started working in emerging tech in 2016, 2015, all of the conversations were around self-driving cars and drones and robots, and there was a lot of fear, rightfully so, around those topics, thinking about, you know, automation's impacts on work and what technology is really doing to society, and a lot of pushback from policy around those topics. But over the last several years, it's been really interesting to see just this change in excitement around technology and the opportunities, and how climate technology could really change some of the historical narratives around tech and be deployed more thoughtfully. So I'm here just thinking about that, and really excited to meet you all after and hear more about the companies being featured today.
Thank you, everyone. So climate change is a social equity issue. Let's start with defining the problem first. We know this, that our marginalized and underserved communities are taking the brunt of climate change. I would like to ask you, what are some of the disparities you are seeing in LA and Miami region or other cities that you're connected to? I know, Smita, you work at national and global level. What are some of the disparities you are seeing? And also, as representatives of private sector, public sector, social sectors, how can we bring equity at the center of this work?
I don't know how you work these mics, so. Yeah, we'll just pass it back and forth. So I think we covered this a little bit yesterday, but I feel like on the plus side, there's more resources available now than have really ever been available before. We look at like the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Act. I think the big issue when it comes to just equity and fairness is that access to those resources is not the same by any margin. So when we think about it in the foundation, I think it's really how we can increase just knowledge of the opportunities that are out there and expanding access to take advantage of them. So it could be as simple as just letting people know that money's available or investments are available. It could be connecting people to networks that can help create connections like LARDA, for example. It could be technical assistance for startups or small businesses. I think it's just, if you don't have the knowledge, you don't know it's there, it's really hard to do something. So that's kind of the lens that I typically like to look at it through. And then of course, like the capital piece flows into it as well, but we actually try and approach things with like the knowledge first and then capital second, like once you're well prepared to use it.
I don't know if this out there works right.
Got it.
I think that what you said is spot on. Of course, capital and the gap in access to capital is very real, but there's a lot of money that's flowing into climate technology right now, both from the government side, the philanthropy side, and individual donors. And I think that one area that I'm really interested in is what beyond capital are the things that entrepreneurs need, especially underserved entrepreneurs or innovators. So two things come to mind that I think are really important to think about. One is the community and the sort of personal networks. I volunteer for a board of a small nonprofit called the National Science and Technology Medals Foundation. They're looking to increase or lower the recidivism or the dropout rates for underserved students that are STEM majors. So right now, the rates of dropout around STEM majors are really high, even more high for underserved students, not because of the brain capacity, it's because there's not enough people that look and feel like them. And so this nonprofit is really focused on how do you create communities of underserved students that feel like, you know, they can continue pursuing STEM majors. How can you provide wellness opportunities and mentorship and small pots of funding? So the community aspect, I think, is really real. And the second one that is relevant to my work is around the regulatory barriers. I was reading recently that so there's been a lot of funding in the last 4 years, almost I think $500 million that's gone into kelp cultivation and seaweed solutions, looking at biofuels and fertilizer, a bunch of other use cases. A lot of money flowing there, but it takes almost 7 years in the state of California to get a permit for offshore kelp cultivation. And you can't get that permit or any of the permitting process unless you have connections, unless you know people in the government, unless you can afford to hire a team of lobbyists. And so I think that that's a big gap that is going underserved right now, especially for communities and innovators that don't have the financial capital or the networks to get there. So those are the two things that I would say, community and regulatory barriers.
I fully agree that community and regulatory barriers are hard. And I think that this is making me think about a couple of things that feel important. So we need to, it really matters where we do this work, right? Yesterday we talked a little bit about how location, like the geography, the place that you do the work matters a lot. And one of the things that we know from the adaptation field, which has been working hard to adapt and protect spaces that are more vulnerable, is that the money that we've poured in has driven disparity. So over the last 20 years, the investments that we've made in adaptation that work, they do work, they have driven inequality because we tend to protect the higher value assets. So we need to change the formula, right? And that's something that is being recognized at the federal level. But the problem with that, when you just protect the higher value pieces first, is that that benefits the people who own and live in the higher value places. This is going to be true for waste solutions and other things like that. And so we have to think about the place that we're doing it and what we're doing and track the returns. And I think we also have to be honest and say, you know what, these people here who have less deserve higher returns. And we have to be explicit about it. I don't hear that very much. I don't know how we get there because we generally give the highest returns to the capital, but we do have to give that to the people in the community so that they can stay there because they are taking risks when they take on the new technology. So I would say those are probably a couple of the most important things.
Thank you. Smita and Chris, you touched on this a little bit on how we can best support our underserved founders. To take a deep dive into that and also the community aspect of this, our communities are very well in tune with the environments and the nature because obviously they are facing these conditions on a day-to-day basis. And so what can we do to support and empower these communities so that they are not victims but rather problem solvers and owners, right? So how can we engage with them in a meaningful way so we can empower them and just drive more and more community-driven solutions? Any thoughts around that?
I'll go. Say the mic. I mean, I think it starts with creating the members of those communities as assets themselves, and recognizing that the people that are most affected by those issues are probably the most likely to come up with solutions to address them. And that's one of the things I love about the Venture Fellows program is that it's one of the few kind of tech and clean tech incubators that's actually sourcing entrepreneurs and solutions from the communities where the solutions will be applied. So I think, and that goes back to the whole issue of just creating access and network support. So, I mean, there's great ideas that can come from anywhere, and it's just the way that the system is set up now, it's really tough for someone that doesn't have those connections or those networks to be able to make the pitch for their idea and then to get it connected to everything else that's needed to help pursue that. So I think even just creating that channel is a huge first step, and just creating the support to kind of see it all the way through. I was talking with someone yesterday about when you bring in these outside companies into communities, there's almost a little bit of distrust. And I think if you have companies that are, if not from that community, from a community that's very similar, it helps to alleviate that a little bit, and it creates that kind of familiarity, and it's not just that someone's coming in to basically deploy something, extract value, and then they're out and on to the next thing. So I think just engaging everyone as like a legitimate stakeholder in the process is the key first step, and just making sure that continues throughout.
I second everything you said. I think that the trust thing is really interesting. There's historically, obviously, history of a lot of, oil and gas and other large industrial companies that have come into communities and, not taking care of the air and the water and the humans that live there. But so I think that there's a lot of distrust, just rightfully so. And I really think it's incumbent upon the companies that are trying to work in communities to build that trust and to show up and to, not just jet in for deployments and then leave, but hire locally, work with communities to think about, community service agreements, what it means for, for the actual community that lives there. I don't know who's doing it really well, to be honest. I don't know if anybody has any ideas on that. It feels like there's a huge opportunity there right now to sort of rectify some of the historical past, but I don't know if anybody, do you all have any examples of folks you think are doing this really well?
I think like the city of New York is making some good faith efforts.
Yeah.
Right, across multiple agencies. Just hearing the way they're talking about it now, they're
Yeah.
like, they have people who I think have been professionals with this goal for like 10 years, and they've seen it not work. And they're like, you talk to them, they're like, okay, we're planning this with the community. We have the Economic Development Corporation here, and we know last time that didn't go so hot, so go there. So I would say, like, take a look at what New York is doing. It's going to be really hard. They seem to be honest, though. Like, this is where it's hard, this is where we're winning.
And the recent federal government funding that says, 40% of benefits have to go towards underserved communities. I think, well, it's not the funding, it's the benefits, which I think makes it kind of confusing.
And
but
how do you measure the benefits,
Yeah.
and how do you do that? But I think that maybe
It's a
that's
good
giving
nudge,
us
I think,
all
yeah.
breathing room to call out when it's not working.
Yeah.
And it's also asking us to measure that piece.
Thank you. So we were talking about examples. I have a related question, right? So there are some cities across the globe who have had some successful projects and initiatives where they have essentially adopted systems thinking. We know that resilience is really an interweb of risks and opportunities. So while we are addressing a certain problem or risk, it's leading to some positive outcomes in other areas as well. Creating green spaces by stormwater management led to making these very meaningful community engagement spaces, increased educational opportunities, even addressing some social issues for refugee communities. So there is this physical and social transformation that is happening with this kind of problem solving, where a systems thinking approach is being adopted. I know you spoke about New York, but I wanted to ask you if there are other examples you have seen of such projects, or even if not of projects, but maybe you can suggest some possible best practices or methods and approaches which might work, even if you can't think of some examples.
There's definitely success. I didn't mean to say there wasn't, but I think that in that specific space of equity, we have a ways to go. And in terms of systems thinking, like that's the question, right? We need to get we need to put the feedback mechanisms in, and I think that there's some success that's happened in community budgeting. I think that that's a space you can look at, and then we're doing it, right? Like we're going and I think you're going to see some of this with the venture fellow stuff. So like you're going to hear about a solar nonprofit in Florida that is doing this work and has been doing it for a long time. The question right now is, can we they can do it for handfuls of people in their solar co-ops. The question right now is, can they do it for 1,000 people when they used to do it for 20? And like, that's it. And I think you'll see some of this stuff today.
Yeah, I would just second that. I think the scaling thing is a huge issue. Being able to validate the technology and show that you have proof of concept and get it going is obviously the first step. But there's a huge difference in, serving a handful of people, like in a very boutique service in a single community, and then being able to scale that up. So I think it's one of the things that we've looked at is, having program support initially tied to the initial kind of tech validation and just the startup phase, but then moving that along, and then it becomes, okay, how can you actually commercialize this as a viable business idea? And then also like creating those connectivity points along the way. So it changes, like the needs of a brand new startup are completely different from someone that's about to have a strategic exit or looking to be acquired. So I think it's just kind of thinking about things across the entire life cycle and making sure that we're providing support to help at every stage.
Smita, you wanted to add something?
I think these guys covered it.
Okay, all right. Smita, I wanted to ask you, because you were at Ashoka, you ran a social entrepreneurship program, accelerator program, and so while you were supporting the entrepreneurs, let's talk a little bit about monitoring and evaluation, right? So we can have incredible projects, incredible ideas and solutions, but until we are really measuring the impact, we don't really know how effective these solutions are. Can you share a little bit of your experience on how you sort of manage the M&E and impact measurement and management aspect of it?
I worked less on the impact measurement, but not to say that it's not. I think it's really important, and I think it's one of the hardest things, especially for individual innovators or small businesses. So about 5 years ago, in addition to my work with emerging tech, I started a small business called Alea Tea. It's a small loose leaf tea company. We work with Indian farmers at the base of the Himalayas that are all pioneering regenerative organic farming, biodynamic farming. They're living on slopes like this in Darjeeling and dealing with erratic monsoons and historical pesticide use, and really trying to change their soil health and combat climate change real time. And so I can really empathize with the small business side too, because we're a team of 4 of us that have been bootstrapping this business, and it's really hard to run the day-to-day operations of a business while also thinking about what impact measurement looks like, because that is like a whole nother job. And so I've seen it kind of on both sides. One of the things I think, so I've also seen philanthropies that sort of take that burden off of some of their innovators that they fund, which I think is an interesting idea. I've also seen some philanthropies that are saying, like, we're not going to be monitoring you, like, don't overthink that. We don't want to add to your job, basically. We need to go so fast with climate deployment that actually doing a lot of the monitoring takes up more time than what we have. So I've seen it sort of done the other way, and I'm curious what you think about on the philanthropy side and monitoring, how it practically kind of works, because it feels like it's something that I know is really important, but at the same time, as a small business owner, as an innovator, it's really hard to do and make the time for. How do you all manage that?
Yeah, it's definitely a spectrum, and I mean, on the one hand, we absolutely want to justify the investments that we make in these organizations, so we want to show impact, and we want to show, hopefully, hard data. At the same time, you also don't want to you don't want to introduce undue burdens on your grantees and the businesses that they're supporting. So if you're asking for like 100 data points, that's probably not super helpful. It depends on the size of the support too. So if you're talking about something that's relatively small, it's not really reasonable to expect a ton of impact data in return. If it's a big 7-figure or 8-figure grant, then yeah, that's probably reasonable. The other thing is just figuring out like what those impact metrics are, like what the outputs and the outcomes that we're looking to achieve. I don't think anyone's really defined that in a standardized way in this area. There's probably a huge opportunity there. That's also tough because everyone's tracking different things. I think you're starting to see some agreement or alignment around certain areas, but it's one of the things that we struggle with. We'll continue to try and hopefully get it right and at least collect information that we think is interesting and helps tell the story.
I want to jump in for a second here. This is just a play off what you're saying. I was listening to a podcast. I think it's like Soil Health or something like that. It's from Minnesota Public Radio, but it's about regenerative soil. And there's a farmer researcher from the Dakotas who was doing this, but for farms, right? He was like, he has a farm. It's a demonstration farm, and they were trying to take 800 farms and measure, is it successful or is it not, right? And what does that mean on a farm that's doing is it regenerative, is it not? And they have a bunch of metrics, but from farm to farm, it varies. And one of the metrics that he says is core is life. He's like, how much life is on your farm? We can actually measure that, right? You can measure the soil life, and you can look at the different sections, but he's like, generally, that's a pretty good measure of if your farm is regenerative or not, is how much life is on it around the full year.
Yeah.
And you don't measure that separately from profits, but you do measure both of those. And they came up with a set of some measures, but I think that we need something like that.
Yeah, I love that. Because a lot of the farmers that we work with, I mean, they don't have the high-tech capabilities to, do soil sampling and go send soil to labs. Some of that process costs more than the carbon is worth. So right now, so it's there definitely needs to be other metrics like, looking and seeing what the crops look like. What is like what's the value of the crops and the life that you're seeing. I think that's really interesting. One of the other points of measurement that we used at Ashoka, which I thought was really interesting, and a statistic that I remember really clearly from my time there, was that over 80% of the fellows that we elected changed national policy in their country within 3 years of election. I thought that was really fascinating because you're seeing, innovators and entrepreneurs on the ground that are doing that work and then also simultaneously lobbying for changes to validate they're using the validation of their work to basically change national policy. I thought that is something that is a more creative way of showing impact.
Thank you for both of those examples. I think those are some real answers because there's this real struggle of limited resources and finding that right balance for measurement and management, but I think you covered it beautifully. I will ask you probably this one last question before we wrap this up. We have some incredible social innovators and entrepreneurs sitting in this audience. If there was someone who had a great idea or a great concept, they're coming from an underserved community, have very limited opportunities, where would you suggest that they start? We talked a lot about the process and how the support happens once they are out there launching their products or services, but how to get started, especially when you're surrounded by an environment where you feel like, I don't have opportunities. How do I do this? So, what would you tell them?
Sure. I think the best first step is, and I know this isn't necessarily easy, but finding an organization like LARDA that offers these types of programs. We see quite frequently that once you get a foot in the door and you get involved in one program, it often leads to another program and another, and it just builds your professional network to the point where you start to learn about these. And we see startups all the time kind of moving from one program, maybe like an early TR level like startups, and then they move on to a next, and then they hear about another opportunity. So it helps you become part of the ecosystem. And again, if you don't know these opportunities exist, it's impossible to take advantage of them. So I think it's really just about building your professional network and kind of your knowledge and capacity along the way. And if you know these things are out there and can put yourself in a position to succeed and just apply and ask interested parties, like good things will eventually happen. So I think it's just getting to know the right people and working with the right organizations is probably what I recommend is the best first step.
That is really correct and very practical, I think. I think sometimes all you really need is one person to say, like, yeah, you're onto something, and I'll give you a little bit of money, and then it gets so much easier after that. Once you get a little pot of money and you can say, XYZ Philanthropy is behind you, then most of the time other philanthropists will see that as like, all right, you're doing something correct, I'll get on this train also. So I think starting with just find one organization that you can partner with or get behind you, and then it gets hopefully a lot easier from there.
Yeah, and I think on top of that, like that one person, if you see a person who is generous with themselves and also well-connected, tell them about your idea and about yourself.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We might be out of time, but I'm going to still open it up for maybe 2 to 3 minutes. If anyone has questions or even comments, this is really, we're trying to have a very open sort of conversation where we can really engage with the community and our friends and partners. Any questions or any comments you would like to add to this conversation? Please go ahead.
I'm sorry, thank you so much. As you guys were speaking, I really was thinking about maybe a missing piece, and I don't know if this would be helpful moving forward or if anybody's adopted it or have any case study, but green economics, assigning value to our resources because they're so limited and precious and they're part of the community, and we want to be sustainable and replenish them or even have a little bit of surplus. So where would that be anywhere in this conversation, like assigning value to our environmental resources that we consume?
Yes, but it's also very challenging. And I think something you could look at is the donut economics approach, and not just like specifically that one, but the people who are talking in that area. Yes, it's super important, but also I don't think it's, I will say as a person who studied economics and pivoted a number of times in it because I felt like the field was not complete or honest, I would say we're not there yet.
We don't have a standard.
We have many standards. We don't stick to them, we default back to a minimal measurement.
So it's more of like a philosophy.
Yeah. No, I don't think you're wrong. I think you're right. But I think there are certain places that have made the commitment. It's making a commitment to measuring it differently and using the same valuation. So critical thing that just happened is that the federal government put a value on carbon that is much higher than it was, right? So that is exactly this. The problem is the Obama administration put one on that, I don't know what it was like $50, $80 per ton, and then the Trump administration knocked it down to like $5, and now we're at over 100 just this last week, which is very exciting. Changes things, it changes your calculation, but will we stick to it?
Something that is somewhat related is, I think that many climate technologies fail not because the tech doesn't work, but because the market's not there yet. There's nobody that's going to pay for it. And I think it's related to your question in that how do you create markets around things that have not been quantifiable in the past? So in my time working with the Schmidt Futures team, one of the things that they launched in May of last year is a market shaping accelerator program with the University of Chicago, looking at both pandemic preparedness solutions and also climate solutions. Really trying to fund areas that the market hasn't supported yet, things like green steel, let's see, what else? Alternative proteins. Yes, exactly. So I think there's, of course, many people have heard of what Stripe is doing with offtake agreements and sort of creating markets independently. So I think that area is really interesting and one to watch because it's becoming, more common where philanthropists or governments are saying like, hey, actually, we're going to create our own market for something and then put a price on it. And by taking a variety of private sector and public sector actors that can all pool their money together, it reduces the risk for everyone else. So I can talk to you more about what we're doing on that. So.
Thank you very much. Any closing remarks before we wrap up this panel? Any thoughts? If we didn't cover anything.
I don't know if anything. I think it just, to that question, is just, I see it more of like the standardization question. So if you're going to assign value and like real data to these things, making sure there's agreement, because especially from the banking perspective, like if that agreement's not there, banks and most organizations are pretty risk averse. So I hope it comes soon, but I don't think we'll see a lot of movement until we get some broad agreement around that. So, but I'm hopeful it'll come.
I'll say one last thing is that I think I sounded a little bit more like doom and gloom right now, but my heart is an optimist, and I definitely am a tech optimist. I just think there needs to be appropriate guardrails to technology. So I think if there's any time to deploy climate solutions around with using technology and nature-based stuff, it's obviously now. So I'm excited to hear about some of the solutions that you all are lifting up today, and definitely think, I definitely am excited to talk about more about it later, so look forward to meeting you all.
Thank you. Galen, anything?
No, just what you said. That was great.
Thank you so much. You guys are awesome. Thanks so much.